Hello, my name is John Welsh, and I'm a graduate student in Italian Studies at Harvard University. And I'm here today with Silvana Patriarca, who is here as part of the 4th annual De Bossis Colloquium in Italian Studies. And Silvana is here to talk with us today about her new book, Italian Vices. Professor Patriarca, I wondered if you could tell us a little bit about what you mean by national character.
The idea of national character has been around for a long time. We can find it already, the character in terms of the character of a people in antiquity. It's very common today in popular culture, in the mass media. It's still very strong. Although in academic discourse it has pretty much disappeared. It's not considered a scientific idea. But people have this have strong stereotypes about other peoples, and often, this notion is refers to a set of traits, moral and psychological predispositions that people consider distinguishing about other peoples. So it is. I was interested in understanding why it is still so present in the public discourse in Italy. I noticed particularly that as I was reading newspapers and the public debate on politics in the 90s, and I sort of was comparing a bit that presence to the different ways in which in this country we talk about, or the media talk about national character, or the politicians talk about national character. So I was curious to understand the origins of this and the politics of it, the politics of the representations of national character. So my book, I would say, is not about national character. I'm not trying to give a definition of what it is, but trying to understand the uses of the idea in public discourse.
Now, one of the things that comes out in your title, Italian Vices, is the fact that in Italy, this discourse of national character has often been profoundly and surprisingly negative. I wonder if you could elaborate a little bit about that, and why do you think that is, that there is such negativity present in this idea of national character throughout the years in Italy?
Yeah, it's... when I was studying the discourse, right, when I was studying the things that Italians were saying about themselves, I noticed this very strong presence of negative representations, negative self-images. And I thought that, although I'm aware that there are also positive self-images, I thought that was actually important, symptomatic about the process of nation building in Italy. Because if we go back to the origins of the nation state in the Risorgimento, we see that the patriotic discourse at the time dealt with what the patriots considered the defects of the Italian people. The Italian people had gone through a long period of decline, so they thought that the Italians had been great in the past, but now they were in a pretty sorry state. And they pointed out what they considered vices, public vices of Italians, that needed to be corrected in order to have a proper nation, right? So I looked at these kind of vices, and I thought that they were actually changing over time. I saw a change over time. So from an emphasis on indolence and effeminacy in the Risorgimento to later in the 19th century, an emphasis on extreme individualism, a kind of anarchic type of individualism that was not fostering community in Italy. So I thought that those were important, again, issues to examine in terms of, the origins of these representations also. And I noticed that there was always a conversation taking place between the Italian politicians and intellectuals who talked about these kind of vices, and then also external representations of Italianness. So there is a long tradition of representation of Italians by foreigners who visited the country. And for example, the trope of indolence was quite strong in these kind of images produced by tourists or grand tourists in Italy. So, and the Italians themselves saw themselves often through the mirrors provided by these images coming from outside. And also later, for example, the very idea of extreme individualism, we can see that being borrowed by Italian observers in the late 19th century in reference to Burckhardt, Jacob Burckhardt, idea of the Renaissance, the construction of the Renaissance as the moment when the Italians invented modern individualism, right? And Burckhardt emphasized the positive aspects of that, even though he was also pointed out that there were negative aspects. And the Italians, when they borrowed that idea, and they used it for their political purposes too, because I show that, for example, stressing this kind of extreme individualism led to calls for a stronger executive in Italy, right? A critique of parliamentary institutions and the call for a different kind of sort of a stronger state. So there was a usage, let's say, of these kind of images in the political projects that were devised at the time. In Italy. And then I sort of follow these kind of changes over time to see also how fascism, inflected these ideas, right? While on the one hand it was, bombastic about the virtues, the great qualities of the Italians. On the other hand, there was this kind of underlying contempt for Italians, because it continued to have this image of the Italians as a sort of a degenerate people that still needed to be transformed. Of course, the idea of how to transform the Italians by the fascists was very different than the ideas that the liberals had in the 19th century. So the fascists wanted this strongly disciplined, militaristic people. Right, so I show this kind of changes, and then I show also the more opportunistic ways of using this kind of discourse that we can see emerging, especially with then World War II and the ways in which the disaster of the war was explained, by the fascists who had led Italy to that war. And then also what interested me was the emerging of an image at that point of the Italians as brava gente, as a good people, which is yet another aspect of the politics of this discourse.
Who do you hope reads this book, and what do you hope that they take from it? What kinds of lessons and ideas and resistances do you hope that they might develop?
Well, I hope that people, by seeing sort of these kind of changing representations and understanding that they are not innocent representations, that they are actually political representations, they question a bit their attitudes, the Italians towards themselves and the way they talk about themselves, and how these, commonplaces serve certain purposes that maybe they are not even aware of, right? And I also think that it's important for people abroad, foreigners who look at Italians, to go beyond certain stereotypes. I think it's not that I wrote this book because I was particularly worried about Italians being victimized and so on, because Italians do use stereotypes about themselves all the time. So that's not the issue. But the issue, I think the important thing is to, in a world in which more and more people come into contact with each other, is that they should sort of be aware of the complexities of the image that they use to sort of relate to others. So I see it as being a book that could be useful. Hopefully, I'm hoping it's useful both for Italians and for non-Italians to think about images of peoples more in general, and also other, images also could apply the same kind of methodologies or approach to study the way we talk about national character in this country. So I hope that the Italian case may sort of be helpful also to think about other cases.
Well, I'd like to thank Professor Patriarca for being here with us today and talking a little bit about her new book, Italian Vices.
Thank you very much for having me.